What a savior, huh? The likes of us is willing to die for. Check around, look at this crowd. Which one of these guys you're going to die for? Well, maybe I would for Jan Jones. I'd certainly have to die for my mom. Amazing. Jesus would die for us. Set us free. Thank you, Lord. Thank you for your forgiveness. All right, should we turn to the Word of God for a little bit? See what we can learn there. I'm moving down here because, you guys feel like you're far away. I'm used to being in the crying house. I might be out of view, who knows? Can you still see me?
Turn the handle.
There you go. My notes are going to blow away for sure. So this passage in 1 Corinthians that we've been chewing on, after a while you start to think, wow, they kind of like the same thing, only a different flavor. It does repeat a little bit of the ideas and the concepts of what love looks like. So that's not necessarily bad. It's a reinforcement of what we're learning. But today we're going to talk about keeping no record of wrongs. And hopefully we're not keeping any records of wrong. But it's a complicated subject. I took a bunch of time to think this through. I can't even find where I'm going. 1 Corinthians. Let's see, Acts, Romans, 1 Corinthians. There it is. It's an interesting and complex subject. I spent a lot of time yesterday just chewing through all the ideas that get stuck around this concept of keeping records of wrong, because we can use it negatively. We can use it in a hurtful way, and I don't think that's God's intention. So maybe we'll learn something today, huh? 1 Corinthians 13. I'm going to read down through 4 to 8a once again. Love, which is something we're all supposed to be doing, is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It's not proud. It does not dishonor others. It's not self-seeking. It's not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. It keeps no record of wrong. This phrase here, the word for keeps no record of in the NIV, is a kind of an accounting term. So it's the sum of a pile of numbers kind of thing. It's what is the total? What's the bill? We get to the end of breakfast and we get that little piece of paper and it says, this is your bill. It's an accumulation of your orange juice and your 2 eggs over easy. And I shouldn't talk about food, right? It's getting late in the day. You start to get hungry. But that's what it is, right? At the end of the meal, the waiter, waitress, wait person gives you a bill and says, this is your bottom line. This is what you owe. And that's kind of this word. So it's an accounting term that says, be careful about the bottom line. Don't come to a conclusion, if you will, concerning the bad. Don't sum it all up. Don't assume the worst, if you will. Don't look at the bad things that have gone on and draw the conclusion that therefore everything is bad. It's all bad. I think its intention is to get us hopeful and off the negative, hopeful and off the dwelling on. And it may be that you're reviewing the tally sheet, right? how many times has that person said something mean to me? 1, 2, 3, 4. I remember that one. Oh, 5, 6, 7, 8. That was terrible. I got 12 things on my list of things, and then you go back the next day. Do you have this problem? You go back the next day and you go 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah, and 8, 9, and 10, and there was another one. What was that one? Oh yeah, I remember 11 now. And you go back over it, and you go back over it, and if we're not careful, we can review that accounting many times over, and we can draw the conclusion at the end of it that the person we're dealing with is just not good. The word there for bad is bad. Bad in general. Bad things, evil things, wrong things. Often pointing toward the heart, toward the core. It's a bad heart. So love keeps no recurring remembrance of the bad in someone else. Love keeps no summary that says, I have concluded that someone else is bad at heart. I can't do that, because that no longer leaves room for God to do something. No longer leaves room for a relationship to heal, to recover. It no longer leaves room for them to move, as we talked this morning, into a new realm, into a different response, into a better than today situation. We're supposed to be moving on up, right? What was the name of that group? I can't even remember. Who said moving on up? Moving on up.
To the east side.
Jefferson.
Thank you, the Jeffersons. That's what I was trying to remember the name.
It was a great show.
But half the memory's there, and I don't know if that's ever going to improve, so I might not move on up in the category of memory, but God challenges us to look at those we love, those we are attempting to love, which God opened the aperture on that to everyone, but those we love, that we would attribute to them the possibility that they'll be better than they are today. Don't go back over the bad stuff. So that's kind of where I think this is going. The context of our passage, 1 Corinthians, is within the church. These guys are banging on each other. That's what the Corinthian church is famous for, arguing about things and about who's more churchy than the other guy, and whether my church stuff is better than your church stuff. You didn't do communion today, so therefore you're not as good as me because I did communion today, and you didn't do music today, so you're not as good as me because I did music today, and you sat in the chair in the wrong side of the room, and I don't like you anymore because of that. And so the Corinthian church was a mess. They were just a mess. So Paul's trying to get them to go, okay guys, you know what? I know you evaluated over and over again what somebody else is like. Let it, what was that, Elsa? Let it go. Do not recover that over and over again. Do not summarize that into a cemented perspective that person cannot change. Love keeps no record of wrongs. I think that's where he's going. 2 Timothy, if you want to turn over with me for just a second. A couple pages down, 2 Timothy 4. Paul is the one who wrote this, and some people think that basically you should forgive and forget everything that anybody ever did wrong to you. And I'm of the idea that perhaps that wasn't the intention. 2 Timothy 4:14. Was it personal? Was it something I said? You can slide over too if you'd like.
I'm happy to be inside.
Okay.
And I'm not.
Okay. 2 Timothy 4:14 is Paul, the same writer that we're reading over there in 1 Corinthians, and he says there, Alexander the metal worker did me a great deal of harm. The Lord will repay him for what he has done. Can you feel a little edge there? You too should be on your guard against him because he strongly opposed our message. And then verse 16, similarly, at my first defense, no one came to my support, but everyone deserted me. May it not be held against them. Paul remembers what that brass worker, metal worker, did to him. He remembers that. It's not like he forgot that it ever happened. He remembers it, and in fact he uses it to help Timothy, who's a young pastor in the same town with this metal worker, to say, hey, be careful, this guy is trouble. So he's not only remembering it, He's using that memory to inform the next generation about something that's not good. So it can't be that you just forget and wipe away everything that ever happened to you. Paul remembers. In fact, if we're honest, we don't really forget that stuff, right? When somebody hurts us, it's always there. Our heart and our mind has it there, but we don't have to go back over it and over it and over it and over it. And we don't have to take it and conclude that that person is useless. In fact, the second half of that, after Alexander, it's an unnamed, at my first defense no one came, he says, don't hold that against them. He frees them up. They were maybe weak at the time. Maybe they didn't understand at the time. Don't hold that against them. Let them go free. Let that be bygone, in the past, forgiven, taken care of. So, as we look at Paul and his practical application of this idea of keep no record of wrongs, he certainly recalls the harm. He even uses the information of the past to inform the future and to talk to his friends and say, yeah, you know, this is trouble, has been trouble. This particular person is a troublemaker. But he leaves repayment, vindictiveness, you know, the final response in God's hands, right? Okay, I'm not going to fight Alexander. I'm going to leave him in God's hands. And then when there's this innocence involved, which it seems to be on that second part of that verse, he says, just let it go, Elsa. Just let it go. You know? Don't hold that against them. Genesis has the story of Joseph, which is another one of those amazing stories of maltreatment. Joe is you know, well, he's put in a hole, and they just going to leave him there to die. His brothers, his good brothers, you know, this is sibling rivalry at its finest. They throw Joseph in the hole, and then they walk away, and then they think, oh, well, not only can we kill him, but we can make money on this. So then they sell him off to some slave traders, and Joseph goes away, and he never sees his family again for years and years and years. Joseph goes through this story. We get to the very end. Actually, why don't we go there? Let's go to Genesis chapter 50, the very last one. Down toward the end of that, 19, Genesis 50, 19. Actually, 18 is where they kind of break down. His brothers then came and threw themselves down before him. We are your slaves, they said. This is the reuniting of Joseph and his brothers. But Joseph said to them, don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children. And he reassured them and spoke kindly to them. Wow, what a picture of love. He forgave them. He knew about it. I mean, he recalls, well, you intended for evil. And believe me, when he said that, he was thinking about all the stuff they had done to him. What you intended for evil turned out for good, because God does work in that. You know, we have the passage in Romans that says, God works all things together for good. For those who believe, God is working the hard stuff into something better than maybe we could ever imagine. So the hard things come, the difficulties come, the relationships are broken, damaged by a variety of things. And we don't forget that happened. It informs our today. It informs our tomorrow. We keep that as a learning tool. But we don't review it over and over again in order to sour our relationship with someone else. And we don't make the conclusion that they're just bad. That's it. I'm done with them forever. We still hold on to those memories because we can't really scrub our brains. But we don't have to go back over it. How many times have you gone back over somebody doing something bad to you? You know, when it first happens, right? As soon as that happens, you go back over and you go, exactly what were those words? I remember they said this and then that and then that. And they said it. Did you notice the look on their face? And we can go back over that. And it poisons our relationship. It poisons our ability to move forward ourselves. Never mind what happens when we bring that out to somebody else. Keeps no record of wrongs. In Matthew, Jesus takes a chunk of time to talk about woe to the Pharisees. You know, woe to the Pharisees, you guys are a bunch of boneheads. And he gets real detailed. In fact, there's 20, 30 verses about what's wrong with the Pharisees. Jesus makes a list of what was wrong with them. Did Jesus love the Pharisees? Well, you know what? He was willing to tell the truth and say what's wrong. But when Nicodemus came to him at night, he starts telling the story. And you know, if you read through that Nicodemus account, you kind of feel like Jesus has a little edge. Like, yeah, Nick, sure, yeah. Hey, you got to be born again. What? Yeah. Into my mother's womb again? What are you talking about, Jesus? And it's almost like Jesus is kind of testing him a little bit. But when you get to the end of that section, the very next verse is John 3:16. Sound familiar? That's the very end of that passage there with Nicodemus. He says, "For God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, whoever believes in him." It's like the simplest and clearest presentation of the gospel we have in the book was given to Nick, the Pharisee. We had 36 verses about, oh, you're so wretched. But he's willing to open the door and give the possibility and say, come on, Nick, if you really, really want to hear, come on, I'll tell you. I'll tell it to you. Maybe a little confusing to make sure you're okay, but then I'm going to just lay it out. My friend, if you want in, you're in. Good testimony. So there's bad things in life. We learn from them. We mature from them, including relationships. We understand better how people work. We have those experiences and we recognize that God can work those hard things for something better. Maybe we can't figure it out at the time, but God, we trust you. There's forgiveness in the midst of this thing, this not keeping a record. There's this always open willingness to say, maybe we'll make it okay. Maybe you'll be all right. I'm not going to conclude that you're a hopeless case. I'm going to leave the door open that you might be able to come back. The bottom line is we all sin. We talked about this a little bit last week. We all sin. We're all trying to do our best, at least most of the time. We're trying to do our best, given what we have for tools. What if we approached everyone that way? This person is up against me and fighting me at some level. What if I just assume they're sinners, I'm sinner. They're sinners, and they're trying their best. And maybe it's terrible. Maybe their best is really, really bad, but maybe they are trying their best. What if I came with that attitude, that perspective? Okay, you're trying. You're not getting it, but you're trying. It would change the way I perceive that. No longer am I angry that you're such a jerk. Now I'm like, wow, I feel like maybe I could help. Maybe I could help. Maybe I could be soft. Maybe I could be the one who gives. Maybe I could be the one who wraps you up and says, hey, let's go together. Let's figure this thing out. Because what you're saying right now is very hurtful. Do you understand that? Why is it hurtful? And sometimes, not all the time, sometimes you begin to work that out and get it to a place where you're in the better spot. You're doing that. Forgiveness is wrapped in there. Counting, we're all sinners. We're all trying to do the best we can. Now, I want to take a moment on an unusual and maybe extraordinary event, and that is the place of abuse and the use of this verse as an excuse for abuse. I did a search yesterday just about this verse, and there were more than I wished for stories of women who said, I went to my pastor because my husband was abusive at some level, whatever way. And my pastor said, you can't make a list of the things that he did wrong. And they walked away, not knowing what to do. And, you know, most of those blog situations are like, so I had to go somewhere else to find an answer because that was the answer the church gave. Oh, I'm sorry, my dear, but you can't make a list and you can't accumulate those those things that they're doing wrong. And it's, oh my gosh, that is such a misuse of love. Such a misuse. So we need to be careful that we don't use these proof texts and just throw them out there and say, well, you can't make a list of things that your husband did wrong or your wife did wrong. Yeah, you can. In fact, if you're going to court, you better have it. And we don't want to go to court, and we don't want to make a list. But you know what? Sometimes self-protection is that you've got to, in order to be safe, in order to be okay. And we need to be careful as Christians, as you and me, as we give advice. You know, friends come to you. And this text does not mean you can't protect yourself. It does not mean that. It's about us making an evaluation of someone else. Don't use this in a negative way. And secondly, there's another element of this, which is, how about ourselves? How do we think of ourselves? You know, so often we're looking at somebody else and going, okay, my relationship with Lori Gibson was broken pretty badly because, you know, what she said to me. You remember? Yeah. And you break that relationship. But what about me? Billy Bickmore. You know what you did in the past? You know what's in the history books? Let's flip through that Rolodex of disasters and let's review those. And we can ruin ourselves if we don't have this light on the list of disasters perspective. I'm not going back over it. I'm not going to repeat that. I'm going to learn. Yeah, I've been there, done that. I'm going to learn, but I'm not going to dwell there. And I'm not going to make the conclusion that I'm useless because of what I've done wrong in the past. So we can take this home, right? To our own hearts and our own lives. Don't make a record. Don't keep an account of the things you've done wrong. Don't review that in this. God says, in fact, back in that Nicodemus passage, right? He says, unless a man is what? We're starting over. We're beginning anew. We're fresh. We're different. We're able to change. So let's have that hopeful perspective when it comes to love. Hopeful perspective when it comes to loving ourselves too. Come on, Billy Bickmore, you can do better than that. Come on, Lori Gibson, you can do better than that. Let's go. Let's get ourselves excited about what God might do in us. Don't view bad. So, Paul and Alexander, the metal worker, where did they end up in the end of the end? I don't really know. But I know that Paul took enough of the event to protect himself. But he also gave room for God's grace to come in and work in Alexander. And maybe Paul could no longer be in that particular close proximity to Alexander. He had already moved out of town, so it wasn't a big problem. But for Timothy, he's saying, hey, be careful. Be careful, because this can be a damaging situation. Was there room for God's grace? I believe there absolutely was. And I believe Paul had that too. Room for God's grace. So my friends, don't keep records of the wrongs. Don't keep records of the bad. Don't account for all the disasters of your life or their life, and bring the hope of God into that loving situation. Amen?
Amen.